Hello and welcome, one and all, to today's panel on elevating government affairs. Today, we're going to discuss some best practices in and around policy and provide practical advice for you, our audience, to implement into your own workflows. Towards the end of the session, we will have an opportunity to take your questions. So please, as we move along, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box on your screens. Now, I'm sure you might have heard, we're in an election year, and perhaps an important one. So now seems like a good time, being the calm before the storm, or perhaps more accurately, the tropical storm before the hurricane, to dive into some ways to bolster your relationships to weather the storm and remain strong through times of change. I'm your humble moderator, Joe Sabattieri with Leadership Connect, and today I'm joined by three distinguished professionals with years of experience providing a voice for their stakeholders here in DC. Kristen Prather, the Director of Policy and Grassroots Advocacy at the National Automobile Dealers Association. Tim Brennan, the Vice President for Government Relations at the Professional Services Council. And Claire Ernst, the Director of Government Relations and Public Policy at Hooper, Lundy, and Bookman. Panelists, thank you all for being here. I'd love to kind of get started, when it comes to blocking and tackling, understanding policy as it's being passed, understand policy before it's being passed. What are some common challenges you faced after a policy's been passed in your issue area? I'd love to start with you, Kristen, to kind of understand a little bit about how you stay on top of these policies.
So one of the things that we are constantly doing at NADA is working not only with legislation that's being passed, but how it's being implemented further from the federal agencies. So we rely a lot on our regulatory staff to look at regulations as they're being put forth, the advance notices of proposed rulemakings, et cetera, and get an idea of what compliance is going to look like for our members. So try to see what kind of the end stage is once something, gets through the entire legislative process and then gets promulgated in regulations. Also, it's a constant game of trying to read the tea leaves, like what's important to this Congress, what's the hot button issue of today, what are they willing to work on in some instances. So trying to figure that out, and again, working with our partners, working with our coalitions, and listening to our members based upon what they may be hearing back in the district, or what our legislative staff is hearing at various meetings with the lawmakers.
Awesome, thank you very much. Tim, to you, the same question.
Well, hopefully something isn't passed into law before I know about it. I think that'd be a big problem for our members if I wasn't tracking that. But I do understand your point. We rely a lot on our members to give us heads up for bills that are in progress or in the theoretical stage. We do our best to stay abreast and keep in contact with our friends on the Hill, just to make sure that we know what's coming out and any ways that we can be helpful. I would say usually if something's already in law, that's probably past where I can be effective. So I do my best to try to stay ahead of those things.
Totally understand. Definitely good to hear, you're staying on top of these things, doing a little bit of that blocking before the tackling becomes necessary. Claire, to you, as policies passed, how are you developing your relationships?
Building relationships. Well, I would say like the majority of our job is building relationships. And it was funny because Joe, before when we were doing our pre-call, he was like, I hope that like there's a good rhythm. And I was like, well, we're all like lobbyists and policy people. So if there's not, then that's like not great. So I think that we're all like very well versed in conversing, or at least I think I am. In terms of building these relationships, like yes, coalitions, whether they're formal or informal, in my role previously at the Medical Group Management Association, we didn't have a PAC. So I felt like we had to be really scrappy and punch above our weight in that way. And I've tried to help out others who are in that situation with their organizations as well. And so whether that's getting involved in other organizations too, like I'm in leadership with WGR, we're Women in Government Relations, other groups that, we trade intel, and, kind of help each other out and keep each other abreast of what's going on. I think that's a big thing. And as Tim and Kristen have alluded to, I think especially at a trade organization, relying on your members is so important. They are the boots on the grounds. We are, as a lobbyist, I'm not the medical group themselves. Although sometimes at some point you feel like you are, because you've done it enough, you've talked to people enough in your membership, but relying on them is critical. And so really, I think just to the fullest extent that you can do that is, I recommend.
Awesome. It's also great to see we have a group of people here with a lot of strong constituents, a lot of strong associations and members behind them here. I'd love to kind of hear a little bit about how to work with your members, how you're getting that feedback from them, as well as leveraging them in whether it be grassroots advocacy or in better understanding your position as their voice on the Hill.
So one thing that I cannot emphasize enough is education, education, and more education. The more you can inform your members about what your top priorities are legislatively, that seems to lead them to want to be more involved. Whether it's, hey, Congress is doing this really great thing for us, or, oh my goodness, this really bad rule went into effect from regulator X, and now we need Congress to pull it back some. So the more you can educate your members, the more involved they want to get. Of course, nothing beats the face-to-face interactions, but even via Zoom meetings or Teams meetings, what have you, getting them to feel like they have some more skin in the game by educating them on, if this happens, it will impact your business via X, Y, and Z. So the more you can make an issue seem and feel and be real to them, as opposed to just, those regulators or those people up on the Hill, the better. And that always starts with educating them on the issues. And the more you can do it sort of on a call or in person, the better. Newsletters are great, but as we all know, we get so many emails during the day. It's good to have more of a face-to-face or a personalized connection.
Yeah, and I'll reemphasize that we do a weekly meeting just to heads up with our members. We have some pretty sophisticated companies with GR shops of their own. But it's always good just to share information. And actually, once a month, I do something like this with our whole membership, where I bring in committee staff just to talk about, interesting topics of the day across Congress. We deal with federal contracting, so that's almost every committee has some component of that. But yeah, communicating is really important, and showing that you're following things just as closely as they are, I think is important as well.
I agree. And I think that at this point in 2024, everyone's a little bit Zoom fatigued. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself. So I think you have to get a little creative too about, because I think like Kristen and Tim are right, you have to communicate, and I think faces is important. And I think finding members that are vocal are really important too. And I know at least at MGMA, I spent a lot of time trying to identify those who could speak very, like eloquently and knowledgeably, and in like a controlled sense, because sometimes members can get really like enthusiastic about their issues, and you have to sort of control for that a little bit. And so we would employ tactics like, I would look, if I was doing grassroots letters and I was looking at my platform, I'd look like on the back end and see if there were like particular people who sent in a lot of letters, if I'm trying to identify new people. Or I would send out like a survey and I would see who was responsive, and I would make sure the questions were pretty comprehensive. So it wasn't just like a lot of feelings. It was like, okay, here are some actual facts that I can bring to the Hill or to the agency. So I think sort of employing some of those more, I don't know, like you have to get a little creative about how to sort of get new blood into these organizations, because, you have members that will, eventually retire, phase out anyways. And so you have to continue to bring in people who like continue that knowledge, that brain trust, which can be lost in the process if you're not careful.
That's awesome to hear, Claire, how Kristen, you started with educating your stakeholders. Claire, learning from your stakeholders. It's definitely this circular system, and it's probably, I mean, definitely worth bringing up the other end of that system, which is those legislators. How are you educating, or how do you present yourself as an expert with the information that your stakeholders, your members, your associate members are bringing to you, and making sure that those people on the Hill really understand the weight of the research that your members are bringing you.
So to piggyback off of Claire, it's learning from our members too. So especially when you're talking with lawmakers, if I've talked to a member recently and they've told me that, they have this type of car that's been sitting on their lot for almost a year because they can't sell it, like that, they can put a money figure to. And when I share that with members of Congress, they're like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize how this industry actually works, and how much money that costs if cars aren't being sold. So talking to members and getting their personalized stories to share when you're on the Hill, that presents you as not just the face of the organization, but now you're talking about Jane from back home in the district, and then closing that loop even further by relaying staff contacts to your members so that they can get in touch and start building up the relationship with the lawmakers. So learning from them and taking their personalized stories it's a huge way to come in with a lot more credibility, rather than just, well, we don't like this because.
Well, as a recent staffer, I really appreciate that, Chris. I mean, actually doing your homework on who you're talking to, I think, is equally as important. Staffers aren't experts on everything and can't be, and everybody has their own special world that they're in charge of. So just being mindful of their time and what their expertise is or may not be. But yeah, doing a lot of homework, making sure that you know exactly who you're talking to and what you're talking to them about. I always love the personal stories, something that you can quantify, because not only are you explaining it to them, but they have to go and explain it to their boss. And if you want to get airtime with the boss on any specific issue, it's got to be really compelling. So there is a lot of work that goes into advocacy, and it's certainly not as easy as sending a form letter out.
Yes, I agree with all of this. I would emphasize brevity. I would emphasize, what is it? I think it's a Shakespearean quote. It's like brevity is the something of wit. I don't know. See, that's just I will find it. But it is like that's important. I like to do I mean really short, like short meetings to the point. I do like exclusively healthcare, which is incredibly complicated. And so you really have to know what you're talking about to boil it down to like Tim said, something that is digestible for the staffer, and then they can take that to their boss. I also like to leave behinds, like, position papers, but doing that like same sort of thought process of it has to be really short and to the point. Like I'm not going to leave a dissertation. I'm going to leave like, I like graphics and bullet points. I'm like, it can only be one page. A one pager should be one page. So those are just a couple other things.
Absolutely. I feel like stories have come up a lot here. And I mean, we all love stories, right? There's a reason we're still quoting Shakespeare centuries later, right? The man wrote a good story. But I'd love to kind of hear, when it comes to your stories, the stories of your members, other than bringing those to the Hill, are there other ways to leverage those stories in order to present your point strongly? Whether that be social media or other avenues in which to leverage your stories.
So one of the ways that we're very good at leveraging our stories is show and tell. There's a reason why everyone does that in kindergarten. So you can go and meet the lawmaker in their office. That's great. but if you can do an event, or your members can do an event where the congressperson can go to them. So one of the things we're very good at is doing dealership visits, where someone can come in and they see, you know, what does it look like when someone brings their car in to get an oil change? What, you know, what is the shop foreman doing? What are some changes that have been made with, you know, EVs becoming more common? What does the sales process look like? So doing a show and tell with a member of Congress as well as with your members, that's a really great thing for them to see. And it doesn't always have to be super, you know, exciting, but just something where they can experience firsthand what it is your members do and see, you know, why you're advocating so hard on their behalf.
That's good. And I actually think events like this, or in-person events, we've hosted members of Congress for our members. And again, I host sessions like this with staff. A lot of times they don't get the ability to share what they care about and what their great ideas are. Usually it's folks just asking them for things. So you'd be surprised what you would get if you just ask somebody what they're interested in. I don't think it happens that often. So I found that to be incredibly effective, and it provides other opportunities. If you can help them advocate to your members for things they're interested in, they're more receptive the next time when you need something.
I totally agree. I think site visits are great, and sort of looping back to one of the first things you asked, Joe, about how to get members more engaged. I think, you know, a really cool thing in the past has been to have a member, like at MGMA, have one of our members bring a member of Congress to their clinic, talk about prior authorization, which is essentially when care is like sometimes delayed because there needs to be an approval ahead of time by the insurance company. It's something that's a huge sticking point for the provider community. And then to have a hearing subsequently and hear that clinic and the MGMA member reference in the hearing, because the member went there and was like, that is a really, you know, moving thing. And then you get, you know, your own membership really excited and involved. So I think things like that are really great if you can swing it. Or, I mean, staff too. Just really anybody in the office who can experience what you're trying to explain, because some of this stuff is, at least, I mean, in everybody's field, is complicated. I think some of the like really niche, like administrative burden issues within healthcare, it's like, it's really helpful to like have someone clicking through the computer and show you what is going on, because other than that, like it's just really hard to put it together.
No, absolutely. I mean, with the way legislation is passed, from everything from, you know, healthcare, foreign policy, you know, we expect our Congress to be experts on everything, and that's simply, you know, impossible. So having that information, having those experiences, stories to share and bring them to part of, definitely a good way to think about how we're able to support them and educate them. Now, when it comes to your own personal brand, right? Of course, you're representing your organization well. You're representing, and you have your constituents and members behind you, helping you to present yourself professionally. But at the end of the day, you are the ones who are entering those offices and shaking those hands. So I'd love to kind of hear some of the ways that you might be able to, whether it be leveraging your experience or leveraging that information, to find different ways to make sure that they understand that you are a trusted resource, because they can't be the expert on healthcare, automobiles, government procurements, you know, jack of all trades, master of none. How can you prove that you're the master?
So one of the things is it's sort of hard to say how it happens, because it happens very organically that you become kind of the trusted source of things. One thing that goes into that for us especially is NADA is a very old trade association. So we're a known commodity here. But how you become a trusted resource is being responsive if the staffer is asking you questions. I always try to under promise and then over deliver. So that's one way that you can always be a trusted resource. To help the staffer do their job better, like point them into the direction of, key studies your organization has done, help them get more involved with their constituents back home. So just being a resource and helping them out. And that's what's really going to help you build your own personal credibility, regardless of if you're at a trade association for 15 years, like I was with credit unions, or you're just coming over to a new one. So, always be trying to help the staffer out.
Yeah, if you want to be a trusted broker or a resource, you have to be honest. So I'm overly honest with folks, and we'll provide the counterpoints to things that I'm asking for sometimes, if that is helpful. Like I never want to put staff in a position where I'm saying, hey, I want this and everything's going to be great. I'll say, hey, this group doesn't like it. This group doesn't like, because as a staffer, I would say that to folks too. Hey, I know you want this, but these three folks don't. So, and you'd be surprised how far that goes. Just being a person that is open and honest. And I really like Kristen actually delivering when you say you'll provide something to them. Because they'll use it. If someone is working on a hearing and they need a quick turnaround on something and you provide it, you are going to have a friend for a while, because it's a very stressful time and environment. And so being somebody that can be relied on, I think, is really important.
I agree. And like Tim said, they're going to find out if there is like a contrary, like if, for instance, representing providers, it's like if the plans have a problem with it, it's not going to be a secret. So you might as well be like very upfront with it. And Joe, I'm pretty sure that the quote you said, it's the full quote is, a jack of all trades is a master of none, but sometimes is better than a master of one. And it is attributed to Shakespeare. And surprisingly, I'm not into Shakespeare at all, but for whatever reason today, I like keep coming with these weird Shakespeare quotes. So it is sometimes better to be, a master of all these things. And in terms of like your brand, I think at MGMA, since we didn't have a pack, we'd always say, and I think it just made us feel better that we didn't have a pack, but we were really like an honest broker, because it really was like, I don't have like the dollars behind me to get meetings. I have to be like I have to know my stuff. I have to give access to my members, which is a currency of its own, because like Tim said, a lot of these staffers, they're stretched really thin, and they, aren't experts on every issue. Even if there is a staffer that is the health policy person, they might be the Part B person, not the Part D person. So to the extent that you can provide that access, I think it's really, really important.
Calling me out on my lack of Shakespeare knowledge.
Sorry. I mean, I really don't know anything about Shakespeare. Like I'm being totally honest. I looked this quote up recently because I felt like there was more than just the like original part of it, and I had written it down. So sorry.
Hey, fair enough. It's our fault for misappropriating language and quotes throughout history there. A lot of what you guys were bringing up in that was talking about, all right, listen, every time you have something that you are looking for your members, there's going to be a group against that. There's going to be a yin to the yang, a push to the pull. I'd love to kind of hear how you understand, or what you try to understand in your research on the opposing views, be it who holds them, be it what those opposing views are, and how you kind of, Tim, you already mentioned, you got to be upfront with what those views are and who might hold them. But how do you work around to present your information and your members as a favorable outcome versus what might be the opposing viewpoint?
So with everything that I've done grassroots and policy wise, I always kind of go back to the campaign life of the boxes. We always have 4 boxes. 1, what do we say about ourselves? Second one, what do we say about our opponents? Third, what does our opposition say about us? What does our opposition say about themselves? So if you kind of identify who's probably going to be opposed to this policy, see what they're saying about you and figure out your own counterpoints to refute that. And also, depending on the office, be very open with them and say, yeah, they're against this because of X, Y, and Z. They're never going to agree with us, or maybe there's a halfway point. So always look at what your opposition is saying. There's a reason why campaigns do opposition research. You should be doing that in the trade association space as well. So look at what they're saying and then try to pick apart their arguments and how would you refute them. And be willing to offer halfway point solutions if you think that's going to help you win the long game. So always be kind of looking at what you're saying publicly about your organization too, and how is that going to be perceived by someone who really doesn't like you. Going back to campaigning, like if you always have that mindset, it's going to help you get things moving at least a little bit further ahead.
But just to add on to that, know who you're talking to. If you're advocating for more government funding, you're not going to Senator Paul's office. I'm just being completely honest, there's a lot of different members that care about different things. I was always surprised when folks would come to me for things, and I just wonder if they were lost. All it takes is you just Google the number or look at their Twitter feed to see, the stuff that they're passionate about. And usually their staff are passionate for them when you have your meetings. So yeah, you really do have to do your homework. And not everyone is going to like your ideas, and that's totally fine. But if it's something that your members really like, you better find the ones that do, and then use them as a place to start, and then work on the rest. But yeah, know who you're talking to.
I totally agree. That was going to be one of my points, Tim, where, when we were talking about no surprises, and I was like, we need to make sure that we're on open secrets, and just seeing, like, not to say that it's not like independent of who they're, who contributes to their campaign, but like, if we're up going against essentially the insurer community and a certain senator is essentially very friendly with that community, like, it's not like we shouldn't talk to them. We should definitely talk to them, especially if this particular senator is on a committee of jurisdiction. But you just have to go into it knowing that that is the hurdle that you're jumping over, and come prepared accordingly, and really know your like, for me, data is king. So really know, like, in most things you can have like objective data points for. So just come prepared for that.
Absolutely. Feels a little like high school. You got to know exactly what they're saying about you behind your back, or things like that, and what and how you might want to stay above all that. That's definitely really interesting, and kind of uh, just continuing the high school example, where when we were all kids, we might have decided to get down and muddy when somebody talks negatively about us. I think as mature adults, and as you guys were presenting yourselves, having that, like you said, Claire, that empirical data, that data that takes no side in itself to present your case around, is definitely a strong way of going about that. But I'm curious to hear some of the other ways that you are considering, I'll say kind of like ethical considerations, like, of course, like, talking smack is not the most, not the most pointed to thing as when it comes to an ethical consideration. But I'd love to kind of hear, as you're building your relationships on the Hill, as you are supporting your members, what are some of the things you keep in mind to make sure that you are presenting yourself professionally and above board as much as possible?
If you wouldn't say it to your grandmother at Sunday dinner, don't say it. It's very good advice, which I think all of us don't always follow 100% of the time. But when you're meeting with a lawmaker, don't as Tim said, know what your opposition is going to be saying. Don't mudsling at them. Don't call them names. Say, they're going to present you with this information. Here's why we think it's flawed based upon study X. You know, don't name call, just be very honest about, yes, this is what the opposition is going to say. You can disagree with certain administration policies, but you still have to work with, you know, those career staffers who are going to be at the Treasury Department or the EPA long after, you know, 3 new presidential administrations from now. So always be willing to work with people and don't resort to name calling. You know, always try to find a middle ground, even with the people who you desperately don't agree with. And again, if you wouldn't say it to your grandmother at Sunday dinner, don't say it. Think twice before anything comes out of your mouth.
Yeah, my common refrain is just be nice. I mean, be nice to everybody. This is the smallest town on earth. You will run into them again. It's happened to me over and over and over again. Just be nice. You don't know who's friends with who, whose kids go to school with whose kids, which that is certainly a thing. I found a lobbyist at my kid's school one day, and I thought that was hilarious. So yeah, I mean, and you know, my job's easy. I advocate for federal contracting. Nobody gets that riled up about that. And so it's not like I'm trying to save pandas or something. And I can be a little bit mechanical about it and keep feelings out of it. And I know that's harder for other issues, but it really is important to kind of keep your emotions steady, and you know, you never know who your future partner could be. Our CEO recently we supported a piece of legislation. He said, I never thought I would have supported anything that senator wanted to do. I said, well, that's why you never say anything like that out loud, you know, because you just never know, you know, they may have something that they care about that you care about at some point, and they're just humans. So, you know, keep that to yourself, and hopefully in the future, you know, there's something you can agree on.
I agree. I was going to say, you never know like who your allies are going to end up being. And even if it's not like an organization we're talking about, at least in healthcare, I mean, everyone sort of just moves around the same trade association. So like they actually might work with you like the next, you know, like very sooner than later. And to what Tim said, one time I was talking to a colleague and we were on a Zoom call, like a few years ago, mid-pandemic, and her kid walked behind her. And I realized that I have like coached her child. And I was like, oh, that's your kid. Like, you know, like, so it's just, he's right. Like it is the smallest town in the world, and it's better to just be nice and not you know, complain to your partner, spouse, best friend, mom, dad, whoever. Don't complain to, you know, anybody else about it. And I just wanted to bring up too, like I mean, this is same rules apply in the consulting world, but in terms of ethical things to consider, I mean, you do have, when you work for a law firm, there are different things that I did not have to deal with or think about as when I worked for a trade association. And so conflict checks are a real thing. Like, you know, you have to do conflict checks within, you know, like who you're representing as government affairs, but also you have to like make sure that no one is actively representing someone who is suing someone that you want to represent in the government affairs department. And so there are things that I think it's worth just mentioning, that ethically and legally you just need to, if you're coming from the consulting world, it is a little bit different.
I'm just picturing like those murder boards with all the strings and lines connecting different things hidden at the Hooper office there for you all to figure out, oh, are we even allowed to do this?
That's why my background is blurred. I just have murder string boards everywhere. Yeah.
Fair enough, fair enough. Yeah, we wouldn't want to get you know, we don't have the privilege to see all those. But I wanted to follow up something that you said there, Kristen. Besides the fact that, you know, my grandmother taught me all the 4-letter words I know, so perhaps you have a different relationship with your grandmother than I do with mine. We can chat about that later. But you mentioned, how important it was to work with some of those careers, some of those folks that are in the agency side of things. Now, this is definitely my recency bias showing, and Claire, if there's a Shakespeare quote of why it's important to consider all the information instead of what happened recently, let me know. But I know like the FTC has just ruled on the banning of non-competes, and the DOJ has put out a proposal to reclassify marijuana as Schedule 3. There's a lot of things going on that were being done at the legislative level, or have been done in the past at the legislative level, that the agencies are kind of taking into their own hands when it comes to the execution of these laws. I'd love to kind of hear, of course, you mentioned you can disagree with the administration, but you still got to work with these folks. How you build relationships within these within the agency side, within that executive branch, and the importance of finding the right people and maintaining those across administrations, I guess.
Yeah, and that's one thing where I'm sure everyone has noticed that if you're in charge of like the FBI or Treasury or the EPA or transportation, the secretaries, they're going to get all of the press and attention. But the people who are really doing the groundwork are the career people who, have dedicated their life to, I want to make sure that we are having the world's safest roads. And I'm going to focus on, building roads policies down to what types of concrete mix work best, or should it be this type of asphalt, and how is it working with air regulations? Because if you've ever been by somewhere where they're paving, you obviously know there are some chemicals burning, etc. So working with the people who are in those agencies, and again, it's similar to Congress in a way where help them do their job. Be nice to them. Like some of these people, they work in windowless rooms in huge government buildings. So, go meet them in some of their sad rooms or sad conference rooms, or invite them to yours, which have lights and windows, and be a resource to them. And, if they're really dead set on, hey, this is the policy we want to do, this is how we're going to write the rule, have them, offer your members as a resource. Like whenever people are doing proposed rulemakings, they usually have to do an analysis of the market surrounding it, analysis of the current state of play, etc. So let your members be a resource to them so that they can do their jobs better. It's very much like, again, this is a very small town, so always be willing to help people do better at their jobs. And if you can help them do that, then, they may still come up with a rule that you absolutely hate, but hopefully it won't be, as terrible as it could have been.
Yeah, I'll double down on what Kristen said. I was a Fed at NIST for 13 years. It's not the politicals that are actually doing the work. And actually, when I was on committee, I cared more about what the careers had to say usually than politicals. They're usually your better asset because they're going to be around. They're the ones that have to implement these things. You can figure out whether something is actually going to happen or they're going to dig their heels in and wait that person out. So you cannot expend too much energy. But yeah, it's interesting. I think it's counterintuitive to how people would normally think. They think, oh, I need to meet with this head of agency. They're the ones that are holding our lives in the balance, but usually not the case. And you can access those folks at conferences and meetings and things like that. So I definitely would lean in that direction.
I agree. I mostly, in my capacity now, work with the different relevant agencies. And so there are many of the same people who have been there. The enrollment people at CMS, everyone has like, they're very specific. You see them up in like the physician fee schedule rule. They have like whatever, their RVU person and their contact info. So yes, I think that at the staff level, they are the ones that you want to talk to if you have questions. And there's like very specific, Tim, I'm sure knows this as somebody who works there for a while, but like, for instance, you have to know too, when you can ask questions and when they're allowed to answer. So like in between proposed and final rules, for instance, like they're not answering questions. When a rule is at OMB, you can do a 12866 meeting, which I think like was developed in the Clinton administration, right? So you can, it's like a listening session. But that's also a cool way to see who at OMB is working on that rule with the agency, because they have their own like staff. And so the other thing I would flag is, you never know when, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with being nice to everybody. You never know who on the Hill, usually like committee staff, who's going to then go to an agency and essentially implement the rule that the law that you were either fighting for or against. So like you cannot, this has happened to me plenty of times where I've been like, oh, that meeting was sort of terrible because they clearly are on like the other side. And then the rule, like the law gets passed, the rule starts to get is promulgated, implementation starts, and then I get on a call with like somebody at an agency and it's that person. And you're like, great, we're going to just keep doing this. So anyways, it does happen. And I think like, especially in like when administrations change, right? So when we saw Biden come in, we saw a lot of like the Republican committee staff who worked on those priorities. Like, I mean, the Democratic staff like moved to the administration because they want to work on it. So anyways, with an election year, as Joe referenced, it is something to just keep in mind.
No, absolutely. Turnover is crazy already, and then once you consider the way that the Hill keeps turning over and the executive branch keeps turning over, it's certainly an interesting thing. I don't remember. I can probably figure it out, but I can't remember the last time we had three different presidents the last three terms. Right? I'm right about that? Yeah. Definitely, not something that's happened in recent memory at the very least. So definitely worth maintaining those relationships there. And Tim, are you happy to be out of the agency hillside where you can actually have windows and sunlight coming in and hitting your face every once in a while?
Oh yeah, it's great. NIST is a dingy place, and the Cannon building, when you go into the minority, they do give you bad offices. So yes.
Awesome. Well, I think now's a good time to start opening up some of the questions that we've received in the Q&A. For those of you who might have questions that you are interested in hearing our panelists speak on, definitely feel free to keep submitting those. But I'm going to start with one of our questions here. In what ways has technology changed the way policies are implemented and managed? Love the technology questions in the year of our Lord 2024. Shocked it didn't call out AI specifically, but if anybody has a comment on how technology has changed the way that you've done your work, Tim.
And I think I said this to you before, Joe, just getting access to who the actual folks are that are doing the job makes it's a lot easier now just to kind of figure out, who's doing what. Just making use of any tools that are available to you, I think is really smart. You don't have to be the person that's been there for 30 years anymore, although it helps. But I've been able to make good contacts and friends at a bunch of different committees that I've never interacted with before just by using that.
Checks in the mail, Tim. Thank you.
So one of the things for technology, I think what really pushed it further ahead than it would have gone otherwise was the pandemic, where we had to go from a lot of in-person stuff to suddenly virtual. And because it forced people into that space, it's made a lot of people more comfortable with doing things technology-wise. Like 15 years ago, hardly anyone had a smartphone. It was still a lot of cell phones and Blackberries. So now that people have the ability to, okay, so the senator or the congressman can't come to my dealership, but I can take them around the dealership on my cell phone. So it's allowed a greater number of people to have access to being able to advocate and to help lead to policies being implemented. If there's a policy implemented that's going to cost people an additional 2 hours when they're purchasing a car, like obviously, no one's going to film all that on their phone, but they can take pictures of, here's the stack of paperwork that Jane Smith had to sign this time because of these bad rules or, regulatory burdens. So, I think it's made it easier for more people to access it and to show the real impacts of what happens when policy is passed or made via rule.
Definitely. I was cleaning out like a few years ago, I was cleaning out one of our storage room at MGMA. I don't know why that fell on me, but I was doing it. And I found this huge stack of grassroots letters that were like physically sent in via the mail. And it was huge. Like I don't know why. And I mean, I'm a little worried because like they were in our office. So I'm like, did they ever reach its destination? Which is like another, this was like 30 years prior to this, to me finding them. So I think like from a grassroots perspective too, like it's nice that you can just shoot off these letters. It's easier to get people mobilized. There's kind of a flip side to that where it's also like hard to get, like now there's like a tech component. So there's like some offices, right, that, sort of like you're like, oh, like they can only read X amount of characters for this. So now we have to like change it, make sure that the subject header is like exciting enough. And it is a little, I mean, I think like in some ways it might be a little more impactful to just slam a thing of, Tim's probably like, no, don't ever do this, but like slam like, like a huge stack of like letters on someone's desk and be like, yeah, people care about this. But yeah, I mean, I think that it hasn't, similar to what Tim said, like these platforms are nice. They help connect the dots. I do think that like the brain trust, the historical knowledge is really important too, because you do need to be able to connect those dots and know the background and the history behind maybe that like 30-year career person at CMS. Like they might really hate a certain thing, like, and that, it's helpful to know that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's changed. It's made things a little more streamlined for sure. Oh, and transcripts. That is huge for me. I love a good transcript because then I can just like control F everything and find certain keywords. So anyways, that has changed my life.
Yeah, no, I remember like 10 years ago they were selling technology that was like I forget what it was called, something dragon, that was like trying to transcribe things as it happened, but now it seems like the comes with all the technology that we have that has the AI in there. That's my favorite use of the AI too there, Claire, the transcripts there. Um so I have a couple other questions here. We have one one question from Heba here. For communities that don't traditionally hire lobbying firms like military affiliated orgs, can you share your thoughts on the Old Faithful form letter? What are our thoughts on those form letters? They also mentioned that they, sorry, I scrolled down a little bit further, more to the question there. Appreciated the individual stories heard from the constituents from the form letters, but they're less time intensive. But yeah, what are our thoughts on form letters?
Well, maybe on this topic, I worked on passing the PACT Act, which is the Toxic Exposed Veterans Benefits Fund. Without individual stories from those folks, that law doesn't pass. There is something to be said, depending on the topic, about doing things the old-fashioned way. And there are members of Congress, and I'm getting old too. I printed out the NDAA, so I have 1,000 pages on my desk right now, even though I can just Control F, but I like reading it by hand. So I still think that works. I think it's depends on your topic. And again, when you have a good constituency like that, you can almost do whatever you want. depending on the topic.
Did you print out all 700 amendments?
Hopefully double-sided, right? All right.
Um, one thing I will say about form letters is quantity has a quality all its own. So if you're doing form letters, like I would do it very targeted, probably only to like, you have to focus on these 5 committee members and just do it based in those congressional districts or in those states. Keep in mind that to get the attention of a boss, if it's a form letter, you're going to need far less for a House person versus a Senate versus a senator. Like if you're trying to contact your California senators because it is such a populous state, if it's a form letter, I'm betting that anything under 1,000 isn't even going to make, the register. The LC is not going to care. So be very targeted if you're going to do form letters, and only do it to the key congressional districts or key states where you're going to have a huge push of people, so that it's getting to, the Congress people you need most to vote for or against your issue.
Yeah, and I would add, so typically with these form letters, I utilize them like with Hill offices, but every once in a while I'll be like in regular like regs.gov submitting a comment letter, and I'll see like an insane amount of essentially form letters being submitted to the docket, which this is a personal preference. I think that it's good that your like members are involved and they're submitting letters, because most people on this earth do not know how to submit something to the docket, and they like shouldn't fairly. But like to make them different, like to, is I think important. So like to see the same letter from the same, like someone from the same org like 100 times, I don't, it frustrates me, and I'm not like a CMS staffer reading them. I think having them just be like tailored to your actual like stories, your actual experience is meaningful. Otherwise, it's just, I think it like drowns out your actual message that your organization, aka me, spent like days and weeks drafting. And so I just think that that's something to just keep in mind.
Awesome. Good to know. I got one more question that we'd like to go through. Oh, we got a thank you from our question on form letters. But one more question I wanted to go over with you guys from our Q&A here. How do you measure the success of a policy once it's been implemented? Or how do you measure your impact with your advocacy on the Hill for your members to point to it again? I know a little
I
bit.
can go. I think it's, success is in the eye of the beholder. And I don't know why I'm like off the cusp, like using all these weird phrases today, but I would say like one thing that like my what is it, like my Roman Empire, that's like the trend now with all the kids saying my Roman Empire is like that saying that's like history is written by those who win, because I'm like it spins me into like an existential crisis. But it is like applicable to this in the sense where it's all relative. I think you can measure. I also think policies don't end. Like, I think that they continuously go and they evolve. And the issues that I work on, they have annual fee schedules. They don't go away. So getting that feedback loop from your members to see gauge how things are going is important. And then if you're a membership organization, I think it's important as government affairs, as typically not a revenue driving department within your organization, to show your value. And to do that, I always, at the end of the year, we would put together like a sort of a wins document, and we would just make sure we'd include all sorts of things, like whether it's meetings, letters, bills passed, anyway. And I think that is one way that you can at least tell that story, that it is working.
Yeah, Claire's right. It's never over. The best thing that can happen to you on staff or as a lobbyist is to have something pass into law, and the worst thing that can happen to you is that something passes into law and then it's on to the federal government to implement. I just have every time I'd had a win, I'd realize, now now we got to fix it. We got to fix it because this was misinterpreted. So it's never ending. So the best you can do is just celebrate the success of the day, and make sure you're communicating that to your folks. And take pride in the small things you are able to do. It's very, very, very hard to make anything happen, just period, whether it's in Congress or the federal government. So make sure you're your daily wins.
So being a member-driven organization, if our members are happy, we're happy. And as you know, automobile dealers are really, really shy people. So needless, they always will tell us like if they're not happy. And so sometimes and I think this doesn't always get talked about enough, but a success is preventing something from being passed into law or being written in the Federal Register. So being able to make a big deal out of those successes too, to say we prevented this from passing, we prevented this from happening. Sharing those stories is just as and sometimes more important than the stories of, oh my goodness, we got this passed. So, share both sides of the coin, not just when something good gets passed into law, but also saying, hey, we prevented this bad thing from happening. So share both sides.
Awesome. Definitely sounds fun. The Sisyphean task of staying on top of everything all the time. Well, we have less than 5 minutes left in our panel here, and I wanted to sneak in one more question, and it's the classic question that I think every best practice panel is obligated by law to ask, and that is, if you were just getting into the industry now, what's something you would tell yourself, or what's some advice you would have for somebody new to government relations? Try to keep it brief as possible. I know, just a broad question right at the very end here, but any sort of practical advice you'd have for a newcomer?
Do your homework and be nice, and that would be it.
Do your homework, be nice, and learn database management. Your membership, if you're a trade association especially, your membership database is going to be your Bible. So start learning how to use those right as you get in the door.
All of those things, plus I think staying curious, I feel like that is one of the most important things you can do in this area. It's not always the most interesting stuff, but I think if you have that, that trait of just being curious, then that's going to get you really far.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much. I think we've had a very interesting discussion, which really boiled down to, like you all said, being nice.
Be nice.
I love that that's the advice we get to give as a group here. That, being niceness is the thing that you want to put out into the world. I'd like to thank our audience today for joining us and being part of the conversation with the Q&A. And I would like to wish you all a nice, happy, and safe rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care.